Too busy playing with your cats to watch a full-length horror movie syllabus video? Don't worry, we got you covered. Check out this Cliff Notes version recap of our Small Creatures video, and then stick around for a Doctorate Level selection. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below and it'll give you a good idea of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is about. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror and then we take 3 movies to examine from that subgenre. But today is our Doctorate series. And that's where we look at a particular video that we've done in the past, give you a quick recap of those movies that we discussed, and then add a 4th doctorate level selection to that subgenre. We found that this is a good way for people to catch up who haven't seen those videos, or people who maybe don't have the time to devote to a full-length video, give them a little Cliff Notes quick recap of what that video said. But then also for people who did see the video, people who are regular viewers of the channel, we add a 4th doctorate level selection, a new movie that's talked about that's a little bit more of a maybe deeper cut, a little lesser known, something that can be added to the subgenre, a new movie for us to discuss basically. This time we're revisiting the Small Creatures subgenre. It's a video that I did very early in the channel. It's one of the first videos I ever did. I think it was actually the first video I actually did. And so it was a little bit rough, guys. If you go back and watch that one, it's not the best video in the world. But the movies that we talked about were pretty interesting. And the whole theme of the video was really talking about these small creatures and how, while they don't seem like much of a menace because they're small and they tend to be kind of cute or cuddly looking, they can really wreak a lot of havoc. And that tends to be the source of the horror, the source of the fun for these movies. We looked at 3 movies and talked about why they were so memorable and why they become something of a cult classics, all 3 of them, and how they really reflected this small creatures trope and how something that doesn't seem very threatening can wind up being actually very, very threatening. So why don't we go ahead and just get back into the recap of that one right now. The first Small Creatures movie we talked about in that video was Gremlins. And Gremlins is the prototype. It's the quintessential Small Creatures movie. It's the kind of movie that so many other movies in this subgenre are trying to emulate and be like. It really is the gold standard. And it was a massive, massive hit when it came out, in no small part because of the Mogwai, Gizmo, and how cute he was. And also just the sheer havoc and fun and insanity that that movie had. We talked a little bit about how this movie is a good gateway horror movie. It's a good way to introduce younger kids into horror because it's not super scary and it's a lot of fun, but it does actually have some legitimately scary moments in it. We also touched a little bit about the Santa Claus speech in there and how that might not be appropriate for some children. But mostly we focused on just how enjoyable this movie is for both kids and adults, not only just because of the cute characters, but also because of the really insane hijinks that go on in that movie. It's a classic for a reason. It holds up remarkably well effects-wise, and it's really just an enjoyable movie that I think is a great starting point for any budding horror fan. The next movie we talked about was Leprechaun. And Leprechaun is one of those movies that is not a great movie, and it really is not, what you'd consider high art, but really did find its audience and has endured as something of a classic, cult classic, if you will, and really has its fans. And I now count myself as one of them, even though I didn't start out that way. Originally, I was dead set against this. I talked about that a little bit in the video. I talked about going on a drive-in date with a girl to see this movie, and the date went really well, the movie not so much. A little bit of a personal story for the professor there, but we talked about how the movie, even though it had a young Jennifer Aniston in it, really didn't impress people all that much, but still managed to find an audience. It didn't get the critical love, but it found that audience, and it's made many, many sequels that I've talked about before, and it owes a lot of that popularity to Warwick Davis as the Leprechaun, who is just chewing up scenery in the best possible way. The movie's a lot of fun. If you go in expecting the campy fun and you know what you're in for, I think you can have a really good time with that movie, and I still stand by it as being one of the best for the small creature subgenre. And the last movie we talked about was Slither. And Slither is one of those movies that can go into the small creature subgenre because it is small creatures, but it can go into a lot of other subgenres as well, aliens, for example. And it really has a lot going on in terms of gore and really great special effects and comedy. There's a lot to like about this movie. It's a movie that I slept on for a really long time, and I talked about that in the video. That I just never got to it. Just heard about it, never listened to it, never felt compelled enough to get into it. But I was so glad when I finally did. It's got such a great cast with Nathan Fillion and Elizabeth Banks, Michael Rooker. It's got really great special effects that hold up remarkably well, and it's just gross. It's a gross movie in the best possible way. So if you like gross stuff, the Slither's the movie for you. If you don't, maybe it's not so much for you, but it's really a gross, hilarious, fun, and creepy movie that I can't recommend enough. So those were our selections for the small creatures subgenre video, but now we're going to dig into a deeper cut doctorate level selection. Our doctorate level selection for the small creatures subgenre is Hobgoblins. Hobgoblins came out in 1988 and is a bad movie, admittedly so, but it's not nearly as bad as people say it is and has a tremendous amount of charm, but is not necessarily going to be a movie for everybody. And it is admittedly a Gremlins ripoff, but we'll get into all of that. If you're not familiar with it, the movie is about a young man who gets a job as a security guard at a movie studio, and the old man training him explains that there are these creatures, hobgoblins, that are in a movie studio's vault that crash landed there years earlier, and they get loose, of course, as they would in a movie like this, and then they have to go and try to track them down. Meanwhile, these hobgoblins who can basically make people live out their fantasies are wreaking havoc all over the town, and hijinks are abounding, of course, as they always do. But we won't spoil the movie any further than we already have. Suffice to say, Hobgoblins is a ride of a movie, but it's a goofy ride. You know, it's a movie that you could argue is so bad it's good, or you could argue it's, just kind of like a schlocky movie. In fact, the reason why the Hobgoblins even has the notoriety that it has is largely due to a Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode that highlighted it. And that's what gave it its notoriety, and it's a really funny way to watch the movie. But I would say that the movie stands on its own as a good time, and that's an interesting thing, especially coming from me, because you know how I get about this. A lot of these Mystery Science Theater movies are funny when you watch the episode, but when you watch them without that commentary from the MST guys, it really they're boring. They fall flat. Hobgoblins does not do that. Much to my extreme delight. This is a movie that I really wasn't that familiar with. The reason I wound up watching it was thanks to Josh over at Movie Timelines, him focusing on it as part of one of his Dead Last lists. And if you haven't checked out the Dead Last series, you should absolutely do that. It's a great series. But I wouldn't have checked this movie out but for that Dead Last. And I'm so glad that I did. Many of the people that I engage with over there at Movie Timelines were extolling the virtues of this movie as just like a fun, good time. And they were 100% correct. This movie is a blast. Like the hobgoblin creatures themselves are pretty shoddy. The effects are not great. The puppetry is not great, but they're cute and they're fun. And the acting is a little over the top and campy, but it rides that line really well. You know how I get with camp. You know that I'm not really super into camp for camp's sake, or people who are just trying really hard to be funny. It kind of tunes me out. And this movie rides that line really, really finely. There's a lot of places where this movie feels like it's going to go too over the top, too big, too campy, and then it reins itself in just enough to make me feel like it's still good. It made me feel like it had enough heart in it to balance out the goofiness of it, that I was still along for the ride. It had a likable enough lead, it had a likable enough love interest, had a likable enough old man that I was able to forgive some of the less likable characters that are in the movie, and some of the more goofier scenes like the rake fight scene. But that actually wound up being fun and entertaining. Maybe it's a mood thing and I was just in the right mood for it, but the movie hit me in the right spots. Like I had alluded to earlier, it's clearly a ripoff of Gremlins. Like so many of the movies, especially of that time, were. This movie is definitely, wanting to be Gremlins, and it does not have the heart that Gremlins has, and it definitely doesn't have the effects that Gremlins has. It doesn't have the director that Gremlins had. It's definitely a cut rate, low budget version of Gremlins, but it stands on its own as a charming movie, and that's, I guess, the word that I keep coming back to is charm. I really enjoyed the charm that this movie has. Even the lower special effects and the poorer performances wind up just feeling charming and forgivable as a result. It's a movie that I think, you can sit there with your friends and make fun of, or you can just watch it by yourself and still just kind of smile and kind of giggle at it. It works on a number of different levels for that reason. Or I should say, maybe that it's enjoyable on a number of different levels for that reason. Because the movie itself, again, I want to set the expectations. It's not a great movie. It's a low budget movie. It's a cheaply made movie. It's not really done extremely well, but it's a good time. And I don't even mean that in like it's an ironic MST3K way, although it is. But I also mean that you can watch it and just be bemused and charmed by it. That's how I felt about it. I felt like it was a cut rate Gremlins, but I had a really good time watching it. And I didn't feel like I needed to have a bunch of friends with drinks over to enjoy it and have a good time. I had a good time watching it by myself, and I think that if you haven't checked it out, you really should. Now, it did have a sequel that came out like way, way later, like I think 2009, and I wouldn't recommend the sequel. It's trying to recapture the magic of the original, which so often doesn't work, and it doesn't work here. It does try to recreate the look of the original one in terms of like the time period stuff like that. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But overall, it's just trying to capture lightning in a bottle once again, and it fails fairly miserably. In that endeavor, as so many of these movies do. Like you get lucky once with something that kind of winds up being unintentionally funny and fun and a good time, and then you try to do another version of it or do it again intentionally, and it doesn't work. And that's the case of the sequel here. But the original is a charming, good time. I really like it. I do think you should check it out if you like little movies about small creatures. If you liked Gremlins, check this movie out. Give it a chance and see what you think. It definitely doesn't deserve its reputation as like one of the worst movies of all time by a long shot. There's so many much more worse movies than that. So this one, I think, if you have a soft spot for these kind of movies, give it a chance. So Hobgoblins is our doctorate level selection for the small creature subgenre, but I'm going to throw in an extra credit movie for you because I felt like this one is worth mentioning and talking about a little bit. And that movie is Munchies. Now, Munchies came out in 1987 and is another Gremlins ripoff. In fact, it's a very blatant Gremlins ripoff, but we'll get into that in just a minute. But the movie has its fans. It's got a small cult following, and it's one that I think is not very well deserved, frankly. This is not a movie that I'm very enamored of, but I wanted to talk about it anyways. So let's go ahead and get into that right now. If you're not familiar with it, the movie is about this archaeologist guy who uncovers this fossilized alien, and then it gets revived and brought back to life, and his son is taking care of it. He names it Arnold, and they think that this is going to be a way towards some money, but the archaeologist guy's got an evil twin brother who wants to steal the animal because he's trying to do some machinations with some business deals, and then none of it even makes any sense. It doesn't matter. There are some hijinks that abound, as there always do, but even if I spoiled it for you, it would not matter because the plot is asinine, and it doesn't matter. And right from the get go, you can see I don't love this movie. In fact, I kind of dislike this movie. I don't hate it because it's not really offensive enough to hate. I just don't really care for it that much because it's just, I don't know. It's the epitome of trying too hard. I talked about Hobgoblins and how it rides that line between being campy but not trying too hard to be campy. This movie's trying to be campy, and it just doesn't sit well with me. It's a Roger Corman movie, which I've got some affection for some Roger Corman stuff. I like the low budget stuff, and but this one didn't hit the mark for me. And it was Corman's idea to literally rip off Gremlins. He set out to rip off Gremlins, and he did. And he hired a woman named Tina Hirsch to direct the movie. She was the editor of Gremlins, so they were on a mission to rip off Gremlins with no budget. And the no budget shows the monsters, the Munchies, they really look like puppets. They look like little anteaters wearing Jawa outfits. They're kind of cute, I guess, but they just look so cheap and fake, and they don't really look. They're definitely not as cute as like a Gizmo or something like that. They're not even as cute as the Hobgoblins, in my opinion. There's no cuddliness to it to really endear you, and it definitely lacks the charm or the heart of a movie like Gremlins, or even frankly of Hobgoblins. It doesn't have that charm. It's very inferior in terms of budget, in terms of look, in terms of acting. None of the actors are particularly likable. Even your main characters are really kind of annoying. You've got the main kid who's supposed to be a wannabe stand-up comic who's not funny, and but that doesn't really even play out anything of that. He's got his girlfriend who's maybe his girlfriend, maybe just his friend who likes to fool around with him. I don't really know, and I kind of don't really care. But she was probably the best character in the movie. The dad and then his twin brother is just terrible. They're way over the top. That the twin brother with his fake mustache and his, annoying wife, and his surfer stepson, I guess. I don't know, adopted son. It doesn't even matter. None of these characters matter. They're all goofy. And it's so campy. It's over the top campy to a degree that I don't particularly like. The best thing of the movie to me is how unabashedly it's trying to rip off Gremlins. Not only did they get Tina Hirsch to direct it, but they're making constant references to the Gremlins movie. Like they actually drive a Gremlin car at one point, and in case you miss it, it's got a plate that says "Oh Gizmo" on the license plate. They're actually showing little nods to Gremlins like throughout the movie, and that's maybe, like I said, kind of the funniest / fun part of the movie. But it also is just reminding you that there's a much better movie out there that you could be watching that is just far superior in every possible way. And so this one just doesn't sit as well with me, but I know it does have its fans. And that's part of why I wanted to bring it up. Like, there are a lot of people who like Munchies and think it's fun. I am not one of those people. So if you are, please, by all means, defend it in the comments below. Let us know what your thoughts are on Munchies and why you think it's a winner. Maybe you just really like the high-level camp, the really big acting, the really silly comedy, the physical comedy, the slapstickness of it all. I do not. It did not sit well for me at all. It is a waste of my time. Where, honestly, in terms of quality, not that different from Hobgoblin, but Hobgoblin's way better to me. I don't know why that is. Maybe you can explain it in the comments down below. But I'd be looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are on Munchies. And if you haven't seen it, I think you can pass on this. I would say spend the time watching Hobgoblins instead of Munchies. Far better movie, far better experience in my opinion. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. So that's it. That's our recap of the small creatures subgenre. I hope you enjoyed that. But now it's time to look at a horror Trivia Pursuit card. As you know, I like to read a Trivia Pursuit card on camera and see if I can answer it without cutting. So let's go ahead and do that right now. We're looking at the monster category of the card because, small creatures. And the question is this. What liquid in 2002's Signs turns out to be instrumental in defeating the alien invaders? And this is a hilarious question given the timing, because we just did our video on aliens a few weeks ago. Now, at the time you're seeing this, maybe it's been like a good month or so, but I recorded this very recently, and I even brought up the liquid. I actually talked about this in that video. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but I even brought it up in the video, acknowledging that it's a little bit of a spoiler because it's such an integral part of why people tend to not like the movie. Like, the movie has a lot of fans, and I'm one of them. I really like that movie quite a bit, but this liquid is part of the ending of the movie, and a lot of people really don't like it. A lot of people find it to be dissatisfying. I think that's an overblown criticism. I think it's actually fairly well set up in the movie, and I think it works pretty well, and I think it's very easily defensible. But that, again, we talked about that more in the video. Go back and watch that video, by the way, if you haven't checked it out. But you're looking for a liquid. If you don't know, if you've seen Signs, you know the answer to this. It's super, super obvious if you've seen the movie. But if you haven't seen the movie and you don't know, time to take a guess, because I'm prattling on a little bit to give you a bit of time to answer the question. And, you've had that time. What liquid are you going to guess? Think it out. Going once, going twice. Okay, so my answer, of course, is water. And I know I got it right, but we're going to double check. It is water. Water's the right answer. And if you didn't know that, it's because you haven't seen Signs. And I recommend you seeing Signs because it's a really, really good movie. But if you didn't know that, what did you guess? Did you guess something funny like soup? Tell me what your wrong answer was in the comments below, because I get a kick out of wrong answers. And this is a perfect kind of question for wrong answers. Was it beer? Was beer the answer? I can think of some funny answers. I hope you had a good funny answer in the comments for me. But no matter what, I hope you join us in the comments to talk about these movies or other movies. What would your doctorate level selection be for the small creature subgenre? Have I missed some small creature movies that should be talked about? Because I know there are other ones out there. Let me know what your favorites are in the comments below. But until next week, when we look at something else entirely different, class dismissed.